Just makes you wonder, like, what the heck happened here? 1879, 10 years old, 9 years old, 6 years old, 3 years old, goodness, 12 years old in 5 days. And then of course we have a 19-year-old. Just makes you wonder, like, what happened there? I'm gonna do a little investigation on that. Well, part of the story of ghost towns here in the Midwest is actually these cemeteries that are out in the middle of nowhere in rural Iowa, Nebraska. And there's a story here at this little rural cemetery here in O'Brien County. This is Randolph Cemetery, and it just kind of sits off the main highway. And the mystery as you kind of go through here is what happened, the story of what happened in this place, because most of the grave sites say 1879, and most of them were children, from what I could tell, ages of 9 and 10 and 6 and 4. One of the stories of ghost towns really isn't in the towns themselves, but what's left over, and sometimes you find nothing. You go to these ghost towns and the only thing that's left is stories past, which is sometimes these rural cemeteries. Well, my investigation and research brought me to this small country church called Covey Church. It is the oldest church in O'Brien County. Let's go check it out right now. Man, it is 10 below zero right now. And so we are out in the elements, and this just kind of gives us a whole idea and a whole different story to what it was like to kind of live in these places. But this church really kind of paints a picture of what it was like to kind of live in rural Iowa, why ghost towns kind of came into existence. It's built in 1874, and it's a sad story in itself. Pastor Covey, when he started in 1873, lost his wife to typhoid fever. A day later, his son dies, and a week after that, his youngest daughter dies. It just shows the story of the hardships and just how strong you'd have to be to really not only survive, but just to live in the Midwest in the late 1800s. To the south of the church, they have the cemetery, and that's what I want to kind of take you through right now. You know, it just kind of made me think a little bit about that small rural cemetery and why a whole family like that would just perish. And you had things like smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, scarlet fever, typhoid fever. That leads to another story of C.F. Rhodes, who came from out of state to start a grocery business here on the Primgar area here in O'Brien County. He had only been here just a few months, and he lost his son to a disease, and a week after burying his one son, he buried his second son. His two boys were buried in the northwest corner of that cemetery. They had the blank stones, and I was able to find them. And that's really the beginning of the story of C.F. Rhodes, as he just encountered hardship after hardship. He was even quoted in saying that he was just having a string of bad luck. Little did he know that his string of bad luck was only beginning, as he was going to have to close down his grocery store just a few months later and move his family south to Kansas to try to escape the great Northwest Iowa grasshopper infestation.
Of course, the grasshopper or locust plague of 1873-1874 covered much larger ground than just northwest Iowa. It swept down from Canada all the way to Texas, bringing complete devastation to the Great Plains. The grasshoppers lasted 7 years. They were not merely the common small tame grasshoppers seen each year, they were known and called Rocky Mountain locust. When they arose in the millions in great clouds, they literally would dim and cloud the sun. The story of the Grasshopper Plague was intriguing enough for me that I decided to learn a bit more about it by talking with local historian and friend Jim Schooley. Jim owns a local coffee shop and furniture repair shop and knows a lot about pioneer and Midwest history. He's a bit of a Renaissance man and has the knowledge, style, and taste to go along with it.
Hey Jim, how are you, friend?
All right.
Good.
In 1874, they were calling it the Great Grasshopper Plague. So I don't know if you know much about.
Oh, my family went through that in South Dakota.
They did. Cool. That's what I want to know.
There was seasons when their entire crop was completely eaten by grasshoppers. You know, there would be, like, for example, you know, the mules would all die, and the vets were unable to figure out what the cause of it was, and once you lose 2 or 3 teams of mules, you're out of business. That's like somebody stealing all your tractors.
There were stories I was reading about it that there were times that you couldn't even see the sun
Yes.
because there's that many. They would just come.
Yep, like a plague of locusts, just filled the sky. And, you know, in those situations, you know, a lot of people would just leave. Take what they had and get out, and then, you know, the bank or the neighbors would take over the property and be gone.
But no, they even had a name for it. This blew me away too. So they called them the Rocky Mountain Locust.
Yep, I've heard that.
And they were a different kind of grasshopper. They were huge. They were almost like black in color. They were huge, and they could just shred and mow down your crops like just within a day.
I think, well, they were ravenous eaters, and I think there was a point somebody was talking about how the conditions were perfect. Like there was drought here, which meant that, you know, the eggs were all hatching, they didn't get washed away or whatever, I don't know.
Right.
Like there hadn't been a wildfire for a while to, you know, kill them off, and suddenly they had a big population boom. But, you know, the world is full of freak accidents.
Stories like these, the cemeteries and the oldest church here in O'Brien County, just goes to show the strength and the resilience of people living in the late 1800s. Some surviving ghost towns, some creating them.